I think that to be unmatched is a great aspiration and certainly what every marketer should be striving for.
Today, I am extremely excited to have Seth Matlins with me.
Become so consumed by the prefixes, digital marketing, social marketing, media, that we forget it's all just marketing.
You're one of the few people that actually asks the right questions.
How do you quantify brand loyalty? How do you quantify share of mind?
What is it that marketers need to train themselves on or be prepared for?
Look, I think it again comes down to ingredients as much as a recipe. It's my perspective. Nobody has a harder job in the C-suite than the CMO.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unmatched. Today, I am very honored and extremely excited to have Seth Matlins with me on the pod. Seth, welcome to Unmatched.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm very excited to have you, Seth, on the pod because you are one of the marketers that I most follow online. The reason for that is I feel like you're one of the few people that actually asks the right questions. To most marketers out there who are, interested in to follow you as well. But before we go into that and we tap into your sort of your thinking and your journey as well, I'm curious to know what brought you to marketing in the first place. Now, your role now is at Forbes CMO, and I would love for you to also go into that and what you're doing there. But first and foremost, how did you land on a marketing career in the first place?
Well, there's a couple of ways into that answer. The most direct, I suppose, is I grew up talking about marketing at the dinner table, quite literally. My father was a management consultant. My stepmother, with whom I also grew up, was head of new business for a big ad agency in New York City at the time. And so I was surrounded by marketing and marketers, and I always thought I'd have a career in advertising. I actually wanted to be a creative, but I wasn't creative enough. So that didn't go well. But my career's really largely been, I'd say, advertising industry adjacent, but advertising objectives, which is to say, how do we solve a business problem through the application of creative thinking quite directly. The slightly longer answer is that when I was 12, I switched schools and I went from a public school to a very fancy private school. And at 12, we're figuring out who we are. We're beginning to express ourselves in interesting and different ways. And every one of my friends was wearing new friends was wearing a Lacoste shirt. And so I wanted a Lacoste shirt. And asked my mother if I could go get some, and she said that we couldn't afford it at the time, and which only made me want it more. But the relevance of that isn't my sartorial decision, that it was the first time that I really connected with the brand as a way of belonging, of connecting with other people, of expressing myself, of saying something about who I am and what I aspired to. And I think that in that moment or those moments, I really saw the power of what we do and what we can do to make people feel something and express something that matters to them.
It's interesting because I think we can all go back to a childhood memory that is linked to some kind of an ad, to some kind of a brand, whether it's, I don't know, Coca-Cola or the shoes we were wearing or the shirts we were wearing. There seems to be always an emotional connection. How important is that in marketing?
Well, I think it's certainly a net positive. I don't know that it's always, however, important, which is to say there's some categories where it's not important and pure product functionality, efficacy, more traditional price value constructs perhaps matter more. Right? I don't have an emotional relationship to many of the things in my pantry, to the motor oil I use, et cetera, et cetera. But when we have an emotional relationship, as need not really be explained to your audience, net positive, and there can be nothing more powerful than that, assuming it's positive or negative.
Absolutely. So you are managing director of Forbes CMO.
Of the
This
Forbes
is your
CMO
current.
Network. Yeah.
Correct. What is your role about? And I'm asking this because I love how you seem to ask some really deep questions about marketing, right? To the network, and obviously a lot of times directed at marketers and CMOs alike. I wonder if that's connected to sort of the deeper meaning of what your role is over there.
Yeah, well, I think I might answer by differentiating between my job and its responsibilities and my role, which has a bit more narrative to it, perhaps, though, of course, it all is pretty closely aligned. In terms of, my day-to-day responsibilities, it starts by building a community and a community of the senior most marketers in the world. And while we are the CMO network, since I've been at Forbes, which is coming on 2 years, we've opened up that network to, I think, a broader contribution from others who surround the CMO, because no CMO does what she does by herself, as you know very well. Um, so it's to build and service community. It's to connect community, and then from just a pure tentpole perspective, we have the Forbes Entrepreneurial CMO list, which is coming into its third year. A list I created when I got here to kind of lean into two things, which is one, Forbes 105, 106 years of equity in championing entrepreneurial capitalism, and two, a belief that in today's world where it's my perspective, nobody has a harder job in the C-suite than the CMO, that it takes an entrepreneurial mindset and an approach to learning, risking, failing, learning from that failure, optimizing, et cetera, to be a successful marketer. We also, of course, have I think we're going into the 12th year of the world's most influential CMOs list, which is a global data-driven ranking of 50 of the world's most appropriately influential CMOs. And we have what this year will be our 20th anniversary Forbes CMO Summit, along with our first London Summit. Both of them will be in the fall. But back to kind of the language you used as to my role. I spent most of the last 25 years in and around Hollywood. I started CAA marketing. I was at Endeavor. I was the CMO at Live Nation. And I learned a tremendous amount about marketing and, in fact, about service from Hollywood agents and some of the biggest and best Hollywood agents in the world. And I think that I look at our job here at the Forbes CMO Network, at least in part, as being an agent to and for marketing and chief marketers in particular. Because as anybody who's followed me for any moment, I think both marketing and marketers are at a time of inflection, a time of reflection, and could use an agent representing them, because sometimes it is easier for someone to represent you than for you to represent yourself.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. And actually, going back to the point that you mentioned earlier, you said that marketers and CMOs specifically are going to one of the toughest maybe times. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's obviously the confluence of many things, not the least of which, and all of this is been said by thousands of others ad nauseum, but it's changes in the marketing media consumer landscape. It's the decades long decline of mass media, of mass markets, of the efficacy of traditional marketing. It is the decentralization of the practice, kind of on the back of the democratization of influence because of social media. It is that, I think, because the increasing pressure, however unfounded, not unfounded, however uneducated it may be, to show short-term results from long-term strategies, to quantify everything, which, going back to your first, one of your first points, which is, how do you quantify emotional connection? How do you quantify brand loyalty? How do you quantify share of mind? Oftentimes the most important things, the things that we can't measure, are the ones that influence purchase or the absence of purchase most. I think, that the CMO is today expected to plan for the unimaginable and react to the unforeseen in real time exacerbates it. I think that because so many CEOs and CFOs do not come, I think close to 90%, and this is of the Fortune 250, 90% have no marketing background and only 4% were CMOs. So they don't understand the art of the practice, which makes it hard for them to be participants in and partners to its succeeding. And I could go on for longer than you'll let me.
No, I know it's a big conversation, but to stick on the topic of profile, because I feel like this is what you are touching on a little bit right now. Do you also feel that it's maybe because there's been this, quite huge shift in how we do marketing from maybe a more creative approach in the past to a more performance driven and social media driven in the present, and so the sort of the pressure on measuring is because also the way that we're looking at marketing today is a little bit different than maybe some years ago. Um, has that anything to do with the current situation in your opinion?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think kind of, if we were to look historically, right, there's been a shift, and I'm going to paint with a very broad brush, so I'll ask your audience's forgiveness for that. There's been a shift from kind of a CPG model to much more of a tech model, right? And inside the tech organization, so you go back, let's talk about kind of the big platforms for a moment. You go back to when when Facebook, and it was just Facebook at the time, not Meta, hired their first CMO. Their first CMO, who came from a tech background, eBay, PayPal, some other places, was reporting to a product person, right? Which, I'll tell you, when I heard about that, I was like, how's that make sense? Shouldn't the product person be reporting to the CMO? Because, I'm old enough that, the 4 Ps, product, price, place, and promotion, we're all
Yep.
the marketers'
Important,
bailiwick.
yes.
But engineers and I mean that factually, not dismissively, took over, right? And they certainly dominate, right, inside a tech world. And our world has become more tech driven. Then, let's talk about two of the platforms. We'll refer to them as Meta now and Google, who come up. I don't know who did it first, but they come up with the language of performance marketing simply as a way of putting a title over pay per click, right? They were just selling
Yep.
digital ads. But
Yes.
what happened was marketers bought into that to such a degree that they lost control of the narrative, and suddenly brand was bifurcated from performance, as if brand hasn't been the greatest performance engine in the history of performance engines for thousands of years. To your question, about creativity, I don't think creativity should be, can be, or necessarily is absent from quote unquote performance marketing any more than I think measurement can or should be absent from brand marketing. I think it's all just marketing, and we've become so consumed by the prefixes, digital marketing, social marketing, media, blah, 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 that we forget it's all just marketing, right? It is all intended, as much as things have changed, it's all still intended to capture somebody's attentions and influence their attitudes and intentions, right? Influence their behaviors, get them to think and act a certain way. As the funnel has collapsed, kind of the traditional paced approaches may have been complemented, supplemented, and sometimes made irrelevant. But creativity has never, ever been more important. And if I have, amongst my many concerns, is that creativity has been commoditized, and that there's actually, it's not so much a question of creativity gone awry as creativity gone away. And if you look at the last 10, 12 years, which have certainly been on the back of technology, again, the most data-driven in marketing's very long history. And there's a old saying that, sex work is the oldest profession in the world. It's not true. Marketing is the oldest profession in the world because
I
somebody
agree.
had to sell everything else, which is to say that in that 10 or 12 year period where we've become so data-driven, brands have become incrementally, if not exponentially, less important from a measurement perspective, which is to say the data shows, and this is Havas's meaningful brand survey over time, something like 75, 77% of brands could disappear while you and I are on this podcast, and nobody would even notice or care. Now, that's as much about the proliferation of products and services as it is about the diminution in the importance of brands, which I think have never, in fact, been more important in a crowded marketplace. But there are a lot of self-inflicted wounds and unforced errors on behalf of marketers. I know too many chief marketing officers, too many marketers broadly who don't understand and thus do not act with the understanding that marketing objectives are business strategies. Our job is to drive the business forward, full stop, the end. We're in the strategy business. The rest is execution. But if it's not driving sustainable, profitable growth, it's not doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it right there. It is all about the strategy, and after that, the execution. You can't do execution before you do the strategy. And I think this is, from
But a
the
lot of
outside
us
that
do.
yes, and I think it's the easiest thing to do, because I think that when creativity seems to not be so important as it used to be before, I think it's the easiest thing to fall on.
Well, I want to keep pushing on this. It's not that creativity is any less important than it's ever been. It's always been vitally important. It is that we are taking our eye off the ball. And I think the data makes clear that that is not serving brands or businesses or the global marketplace very well.
No, and I agree, because the moment one of the brands thinks differently and pushes something out, online that people actually connect with, they see the upside. So when companies and brands are creative, they see the benefit of
That's
it.
right.
So it's definitely there, because, as you said, it's so noisy that the moment you do something different, it will stick.
It'll stick for a moment, and sometimes, look, going back to what I said about it's sometimes very hard to figure out how to measure what matters and how to figure out why something actually worked. Why did something land? Right? What was the first, second, and third push towards virality? But we should also acknowledge, going back to one of your earlier questions, that gone are the days when a marketer did a TV, spent 6 months to a year working on a TV campaign that ran for 4 or 5 months. Now marketers, big, small, and everything in between, are, as you know better than I, expected to churn out content multiple times a day, every day, and so kind of reacting to culture, driving culture, mirroring culture. It's there. There is nothing easy about today's marketing job.
No, it's super complex, and also the definitions of the role in a marketing setup are sometimes, still kind of anchored in the past, and have not been updated to the reality of today. So that definitely
I
also
think
plays a
that's an
lot.
important point for sure, and it goes back, I think, to what a lot of chief executives and CFOs don't understand about marketing. And I will be doing some work in the new year that looks at how they define marketing. Because I think many of them, and again, painting with a broad brush, and there are some notable exceptions and many that I'm unaware of, but I think many still mean advertising when they say marketing, mean PR in a very traditional construct when they say marketing, and don't understand that in today's world, really everything an organization does and does not do is marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because you posed this question openly to your audience some time ago, and you asked
Yeah.
the question, what is marketing? But I would want to kind of sum up what you said earlier. Actually, the role of marketing is to sell,
Yes.
right? So, to make it very simple, that is what marketing is. And everything that is included in the scope of selling uh, falls under marketing.
That is certainly my perspective, and so if the role is to sell, the job is to facilitate the sale, and everything else is just what falls underneath. Getting that done efficiently and effectively, and sustainably, and I think because of the complexity of the task, the sheer magnitude of the task, we can lose sight of what does not change, and that is unchanged. Humans are fundamentally unchanged. Thousands of years later, the architecture of our brains is fundamentally unchanged, at least until we look at my kids' generation. Their brains may be changed having grown up knowing only social media and only having a phone in their hand. But for the rest of us anyway, we are just, and them too for that matter, but we are primed to survive and thrive. That's what we do. Going back to what I was talking about with Lacoste, we want to belong, we want to connect, we want to express. It's pretty fundamental.
And do you feel that marketers listen enough to what consumers today say in those directions that you just kind of pointed out, where we want to belong, how we want to be perceived, the way that we want to express ourselves, all those things that make us human, and which is part of human psychology that doesn't necessarily change, at least not so rapidly. Do you feel that we are still listening to those cues?
I don't know that I have an opinion on whether or not we're listening, but if we're listening, we're not analyzing and we're not hearing. There is a kind of an absence of humanity in so much of marketing, right? B2B, B2C, D2C, an absence of recognition that our job is to make whoever the end user's life, whoever the end user is, it's to make their life easier. And if we make it easier, that's how we facilitate the sale. That's how we build that emotional connection in some categories. There's some data out of the UK. It's I hope he'll forgive me because not only can I not remember his name in the moment, but I don't remember how to pronounce his last name. He's the great measurement genius at Adam and Eve DDB out of London. And I do hope he'll forgive me. He's doing some work with Adam Morgan from Eat Big Fish, where they analyze, along with System One. Why am I remembering everybody's name except his? Where they analyzed 6,000 ads. I think there were TVCs in the US and UK, and they found, if I remember the data correctly, on average, and these were B2B and B2C ads, 48% of them were dull, which is to say they elicited, back to your first question yet again, no emotional reaction on behalf of the viewer at all. Zero. They were emotionally neutral. 70% of B2B ads were emotionally neutral, as if B2B wasn't also selling to a human being. And their premise, and they're doing some fascinating work around this, is to use their language, dull doesn't sell. And in fact, dull costs a tremendous amount of money because all the time that went into that, eliciting no emotional response, no behavioral response, all the money that went into it, wasted.
Go to waste. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking his name up right now so that I can give him credit that he deserves.
Absolutely. But as you do that, just to kind of add to your point, as marketing budgets shrink and as expectations go up, right? The idea of doing more with less seems to be the thing that is quite, apparent across the industry or in many different segments of the industry. The question is, why isn't creativity, or maybe it is, slowly coming back to the forefront of what can get us out of this, challenging situation where we do need to deliver more with less resources, but we just need to be more efficient and potentially just more creative, make things less boring.
Well, it's a hell of a question. I don't know that I have a hell of an answer. By the way, his name is Les Binet or Les Binet. Again, I don't know how he pronounces it.
We'll take note. We'll check him out.
Les, forgive me. Though we've never met, I hope he'll forgive me. Look, why is there not more? I don't know. It seems to defy common sense and cultural and consumer behavior. I think that it's easy to point to, again, some of what we've already talked about, which is that CMO typically reports into a CEO and or is accountable to a CFO who doesn't understand marketing, who is putting ever more pressure because of their own pressures to provide predictable guidance to the public markets, to the capital markets, ever more pressure on a CMO to deliver absolute certainty, when the fact of the matter is when you're selling to a market as idiosyncratic and fickle and unpredictable as human beings are, certainty is, within a high degree of error. And yet, one of the things I talk a lot about is marketing that misses the mark That's inevitable back to selling to human beings. Marketing that misses the point, however, and there is too much of that, at least in my opinion, runs rampant. Marketing that misses the point is amongst the 48% of ads that, the research I quoted a moment ago, fails to deliver any response, emotional response. I wish I could tell you why, so that I could offer a thought on what we could do en masse to stop it.
Yet reputation scales, but
Marketing budgets
budgets
do not.
do not.
That's right. I mean, I think I posted that a few months ago, and I think you commented on it. And just, reputation scales for better and worse, right? You look at the challenges of Disney's reputation over the
Yes.
last 18 months, from Bob Chapek to Bob Iger. You certainly look at the reputation that Elon Musk has heaped on that, formerly known as Twitter. And, just to point to negatives, right? Because what's the old expression? It can take a lifetime to build a reputation, but a moment to tear it down.
Yes.
And that's going back to what we said, that's marketing too. What Bob Iger does and doesn't do, what Elon does and doesn't do, what every brand, every chief executive, every employee, every salesperson does and doesn't do, it influences. It has influence. They're all ingredients, and whether or not somebody buys or does not.
Because maybe, just maybe, and this is at least my personal belief, marketing is actually the most personal thing there is. It's not, it's supposed to be personal. It's supposed to be connecting one to one. I mean, if we think about the way business was being done, 50 years ago, it was literally two people speaking to each other, creating a relationship with each other, trusting each other, and based on that trust, a
Well,
business
B2B,
was
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Well, but if you then scale that, why is that different at scale? In the end, it's all about trust, right? So, of course, for big brands, maybe don't have a recognizable face or not just one. There's a bunch of them, and then maybe there's, other celebrities endorsing, and there's a lot of, more complex structures behind it. But in the end, it's all based on trust. So if it's based on trust, it's supposed to be personal. Why are we taking this personal human aspect, as you said before, out of it and trying to make it, less of it?
I don't know, but I think, of course you're right, right? What was the efficacy of a brand back in the day? It was on a shelf that was crowded. It was like this: I trust this brand. It helps me make a decision to pull this product off a crowded shelf rather than that one. That is trust. But I think, and I think this is part and parcel with much of what we've discussed so far, that too many of us confuse the personalized with the relevant, which is, all the emails we get or the offers we get within algorithms that are supposed to be the best in class. When you go to Amazon, when you go to Hulu, when you go to Netflix, pick your algorithm. They serve up something. You're like, what? What don't you understand about me? I've been shopping with you for 10 years and you still serve this up to me? You serve up a show I've already watched 3 times and said I might like. We confuse again personalization with relevancy, and I'd rather have relevancy without personalization than personalization without relevancy.
I love that. And actually, a follow-up question for that comes to mind is, do you feel that maybe also because we're human, we don't stay the same and we evolve? And maybe, yes, we've shopped for 10 years, but, or we've watched this TV show like 5 years ago, but now I'm in a different space. I want to do something else. I've evolved. I've had other experiences. How can the algorithm know that?
Well, I think, algorithms are as imperfect as the rest of us, sometimes more so perhaps. But yes, of course, human beings, our tastes, our wants, our needs evolve and change. Sometimes they don't evolve, they just change because of macro and micro circumstances and conditions. But that's the job of marketing. Going back to, one of your earlier questions, that's why the job of the marketer is to always be listening, not just listening, but interrogating the responses, interpreting the responses, and crafting the right communication, the right narrative, the right story as a consequence of that, and then listening again to see if it's responded to.
So considering all this complexity, what do you think drives growth these days?
Relevancy, right? I mean, I think it really does come down to that. Now, again, relevancy is a word under which there are multiple things. It's relevancy of product and service, of timing, of pricing, of reach, of communication, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if relevancy, I think, includes and encompasses a value proposition. I don't just mean, again, pricing, but the relationship between product or service, brand wrapping them, and you.
Because of this highly cluttered environment that we as consumers live in and have to interact with so many brands at the same time, what do you think makes a brand unmatched?
It's such a great question, and it is not lost on me that is the title of the podcast.
Yeah, shameless plug.
Yeah, no. I'm really quick that way. I think it again comes down to ingredients as much as a recipe, right? Which is to say, I can follow a great chef's recipe and use the same ingredients. It's just not going to come out the same way when I make it as when she makes it. But I think that to be unmatched, and it's funny, I happen to have 2 books on my desk, coincidentally, How Brands Grow and Better Brand Health, both out
Amazing.
of Ehrenberg Bass. And right, it's easy to say, it's this relationship between differentiation and distinction, competitive set, it's all kinds of things. But to be unmatched is a great aspiration. I don't know if it's always a great expectation, but it is certainly the right aspiration and certainly what every marketer should be striving for. Because if you are indeed unmatched, relevantly so, because there is unmatched and irrelevant, right? You're going to win more often than not.
So you're saying you can be negatively unmatched as well as positively unmatched.
Sure. Who's more odious than Elon Musk? He is unmatched in his odiosity.
That's absolutely true. Yes, 100%. You're right. And he does stand out, right? Not necessarily always in a positive manner.
No, increasingly from one person's perspective, not, right? I've had a Tesla for years now, and I just bought a sticker for it that says, I got this before we realized Elon was crazy, because I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to be driving it. I deleted Twitter a long time ago. It's easy to pick on Elon, who I will say, a decade ago, I was in awe of. His brilliance certainly, is inarguable. But that's not enough, right? If brilliance is a good thing, it's not good enough, alone enough to be enough to want to support this guy or put any money into the pocket of the world's richest human. So yes, you can be, he just put Alex Jones back on the platform. Well, he's unmatched, perhaps except by, et cetera. I don't mean to keep going down a rabbit hole of the odious. But yeah, you can be unmatched and negative, right? There's always a market for the oddity. And that's not relevant, at least to me. But there are, of course, people who adore Elon for exactly the same things that I do not care for.
Well, I mean, we have to give it to him. The output of his work is quite brilliant. So, at least
outside of Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. Outside of Twitter, but the rest is quite incredible. What is I know we talked about this a while ago, and I love the answer that you gave me then. What is your hope for the future of marketing in 2024?
I hope that it comes to be better understood and better appreciated for what it is and what it can do, for the difficulties that are inherent to it. And I also hope that it becomes from within more singularly focused on what we talked about, which is facilitating and driving that sale that drives growth on a sustainable, profitable basis.
And if there would be one thing that you would want or hope for any marketer like me to try to pay more attention in the next year to what do you think that would be?
Humans, right? And it sounds so silly, and I recognize that it sounds so silly, but we are increasingly dehumanizing, right, in our effort to personalize and so on and so forth. And in just losing sight of the people we sell to, the people we're trying to reach and engage, to move, to drive that emotional connection with. Um, as I said, I think a little bit ago, it's all so incredibly complex. And it has never been more so until tomorrow, where it will be more so than today, all but inevitably. Um, I think that too many of us chase what's changing for fear of standing still, right? And recognizing our own humanity as marketers, our own fears, our own insecurities about our jobs, our success, our bonuses, our families, etc., our own just humanity. Um, we're chasing what's changing rather than staying rooted in what endures, what's unchanging. Charlie Munger, whose name I'm sure he was
Yeah,
Warren Buffett's longtime investing partner,
just passed away.
just passed away months short, maybe even weeks short of his 100th birthday. I think it was Charlie. It could have been Buffett. But when somebody asked them what his investment advice was, he's stick with what's tried and true. That's a paraphrase, not a quote. But they stick with what endures. They stick with the that which doesn't change, right? Because you cannot forecast change. You can guess, but you can't forecast it. But you can hold on to that which endures, right? And what will endure are human needs and wants at a really fundamental psychological behavioral perspective.
I agree with you, and I have to say it's a complex point though, because change means everything that is new, all the new platforms, all the new ways of doing things, that the new thing that is giving you the virality. So of course everyone is chasing that, right?
But
The
those are
question is,
tactics. To your point, those are tactics, right?
yes,
The job of the marketer is still to figure out what to say to whom, when, and where. The what to say and how to say it. Um, that's where the strategy is. That's where the art and science come together. Whether you're using platform A, B, C, or D, or what combination of, that's just tactics. That's just how you spend your resources.
right. No, I completely agree. I think though most people think that growth comes from using the latest thing. So going directly to the tactics is where the growth, the easy growth is coming. But over time you realize that it's an endless chase. It doesn't really take you much further, right?
Yeah, I look, I think there is some truth in that, you know, let's just use these examples. More growth is probably coming from digital platforms than terrestrial broadcast platforms. And that's not just because of the type of messaging we put on it. But yes, as behaviors and attentions change and shift en masse, we have to change and shift en masse. I don't mean to come across as a Luddite. That tactical, technical expertise required of today's CMO is so extraordinary. Antonio Lucio, actually, the marketing legend, he was CMO of HP, Visa, Facebook, and has just returned to HP. He said something to me about a year ago. We were chatting about the complexity of the role for the CMO, and he says today's CMO needs to be the CEO of the function, which I love, the CEO of the function, because nobody can be an expert in the sheer breadth and massive tech, art, and science that today's CMO has to be steward of, right? And like a chief executive, who I think, again, at the risk of speaking very broadly and generally, whose job is akin to a banker, which is to say, whose job is the allocation of resources. So too is the CMO's, right? It's the allocation of resources to drive the growth the business has set as its objectives and targets. Just too many of us are confusing objectives, strategies, and tactics. Doesn't make any of them, doesn't make the tactical unimportant, right? That's where the proverbial rubber hits the road. Execution is everything. But you don't start with the tactic, in my opinion.
Agree. And just kind of to deeper go a little bit deeper into that role, how would you paint it? Like how does that person need to look like for 2024 and beyond in terms of the, not just like the roles, but the personality, the skills, the vision,
There's going to be
the flexibility, maybe
Well,
curiosity.
flexibility, adaptability, and what somebody earlier in my career said to me as a high tolerance for ambiguity is are prerequisites. As of course is empathy, which has become a word so often used and so little practiced, that I think we're at risk of it losing meaning, like authentic and authenticity. Like, what are the alternatives to being authentic? Being inauthentic? Like, I think we can all stop saying that, right? And just consider it table stakes. But in terms of what the executive needs to look like, what the CMO needs to look like, that's obviously going to differ by category, by brand, by sector, by market. So let's just say by company. But speaking broadly, I think it's and to use Antonio's CEO of the function, it's somebody who has certainly a familiarity, if not absolute expertise in the technical aspects, and yet who is also an operator and understands that in influencing human behaviors, there has to be art, there has to be creativity. It's what I think, and I don't know if this will translate for everybody around the world who's listening. It's the T-shaped executive, right? Which is you're a generalist with a couple, at least a couple, a singular, if not a couple of areas of vertical expertise.
I cannot agree more. That's my point of view as well. Is the more you know within the very broad scope of marketing, the easier it is to then kind of execute when you have to. But you have to have this broader understanding without knowing everything, because nobody can know everything,
It's
right?
impossible. Yeah, you have to be. I spent a little bit of time in my career as a strategist, but I came to it quite late in my career and was trained by this strategist who worked for me. And I think you have to be able to interrogate brand, business, landscape, and then the recommendations that you're being given. If you cannot interrogate the recommendations you're being given, you cannot be partner to making the ideas better, the plans better, the metrics better. Honestly, I don't know how anybody does it these days. I know I couldn't be a CMO.
So now, if we want to expand it a little bit, broader into, just all marketers, and sort of to end off the conversation as well, what is it that marketers need to kind of train themselves on or be prepared for to support that CMO role and that bigger leadership in the company, and to also make sure that they individually deliver on what is needed, moving forward within the scope of marketing?
Well, I think the earlier in career a marketer is, the more vertically focused you, of course, are. Right. So you need that. You're not a T-shaped executive at that point. You're an I-shaped executive. Right. Your job is tactical. As your career grows, as your aperture opens, as your experience begins to give you a broader understanding of the intersectionality, the interrelationship between all of the things that go into moving someone from where they are to where you hope they'll be. You need to open up, but I mean, you don't need to. There are some people who are delighted to just stay in a single vertical, but you need to open the still. Your perspective needs to evolve to understand how the application of those tools, those levers, works within the whole. And I think that that's one of the other problems with modern marketing is, so we become so tactically driven that there's no semblance of cohesion or integration too often.
Seth, thank you so much. It's definitely a very complex world we're living in, and as
It is that.
marketers, it's a tough job, I must say, and I think it's a big challenge. We need to be prepared for even a bigger challenge, I guess, in 24 and beyond. So, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and to share a little bit of of your wisdom and your experience with us.
Well, I certainly shared my opinion. I will leave it to others to decide if it was wise or worth listening to. But thank you for asking such interesting questions.